You know they're going to tell you all sorts of bullshit like, well, we're developing our support player, and, you know, if you give him time and experience, like, no, what happened was you're now literally, these all count, by the way. These aren't warm-up tournaments. You played the LCS, you could have won the LCS. You've gone to MSI. In theory, you're supposed to make it to the bracket stage. Like, why are you entering an international tournament without a bot lane that has any chance? Like, I actually think, by the way, if there weren't lane swaps, this team would have been even more fucked.
Yes. I mean, that's 100% true. And we discussed that the lane swaps was kind of a way to hide their bot lane in many cases. And it's not like Betty and Woody had some world beater performances either. Like, this was not the strength of this roster for sure on PSG. But it was an underperformance kind of across the board. I will say Masu did step up. Like, at times he looked actually very good mechanically. So I do have hope for Masu. I think the problem with their bot lane is that while Busio has been acceptable, not outstanding, but acceptable in the regular season, now we've seen him go through these playoffs. He was completely terrible in high pressure situations. Not even like a little bad, but just incredibly bad. Offensively bad in the LCS playoffs. And again, here, once we get into this tournament, there are some real flaws that start to show up, starting with game 1 of FlyQuest versus PSG. Because here's the issue. Nautilus is an incredibly high priority pick at this tournament. And they first pick Nautilus on blue side, and Busio is terrible at Nautilus. And so basically, you don't ban it. You feel like you have to take it away, but you're using incredibly valuable picks to give a champion to a guy who cannot hit anything with this champion, who cannot make any play. And so it ends up being complete garbage. And I will say, like, at the start of this tournament, Thorin, I was encouraged by FlyQuest play because I thought they played a terrible game 1 where they just opted into A-ramming and they wanted to do like front-to-back team fighting versus a Rumble Jarvan composition. And they got baited into just engaging in mid lane versus PSG Talon, even though Rumble has Ignite. They have more TPs. Well, I mean, technically Woody has TP on Tahm Kench, but he's not going to be splitting. Let's be real. That's not when you're doing fasting Senna and you have a Tahm Kench who's farming. You're not using that TP to answer side waves. Like, that's not a thing. So they have practical TPs, let's say, on their solo lanes, and they just refuse to split push with their advantage. They refuse to use Talia walls to zone people off objectives, and they lose the game. However, Thorin, they come back in game 2 and they do all of those things. They're actually taking care of their sideways, applying pressure, using Talia walls properly. So I was encouraged. I said, oh, wow, their coaches came in, said some shit to them, and now they're doing it a lot better. And we got to see them kind of have a significant improvement over the next couple of games and play better as a team and do the things that they should do with their champions. We fast forward to the T1 game. They're not expected to win this, but they absolutely shouldn't get bopped in the way that they did. Game 1 was the 17-34 game, which is just so embarrassing because this wasn't like the Mad Lions game. T1 was running Azir, Senna, Viego, Tahm Kench, Ornn. This is a scaling composition. You can't lose this game in 17 minutes. Like, that's almost impossible. Like, T1, which surely should have been shocked to draft that comp and then win in 17 minutes.
That was some Samsung White against TSM 2014 shit, exactly. It's like the actual level of flex on that's hilarious.
Yeah, and I know, as other people have pointed out, this is a case, too, where we didn't even have 2 Rift Heralds anymore, and 2 Rift Heralds makes it easier to end the game faster because you can push all the way down one lane much quicker. Right? Even though there are Void Grubs, in the long run, I think the Void Grubs do more than 2 Heralds, but in 17 minutes, 2 Heralds do much more. So they didn't have 2 Heralds, they had 1, and they still were able to, do this 40 seconds faster, or 40 seconds slower, rather, than the Mad Lions game that, became infamous. This is more embarrassing than that game, though. And the other thing that's so embarrassing about it, Thorin, is that they had an advantage. They had a pretty nice first blood onto Zeus in the top side. But then, I mean, this is we're going to see what basically the core of everything that's wrong with FlyQuest, you just see unfolding in the next few minutes, which is that Bwipo TP's back to top lane. He then, for no reason, walks forward and takes an incredibly bad trade, which we can't see because it's off camera with Zeus, and we don't have pro view, so we don't know why he was doing it. I think everybody I've talked to about this says that, I believe that it was completely unnecessary. So instead of just being patient and waiting for the wave to push back into him, he takes an incredibly bad trade versus Zeus, which means that Inspired, who's on Graze, has to come into the top lane to bail his ass out, which then means that Inspired can't farm very effectively on Graves, and his position is known on the map, so he falls behind on a farming jungler. But I mean, this is just a total, self-inflicted wound here, right? It's an unforced error that Bwipo made with an advantage that he should have had. He goes back, he buys 2 ruby crystals, TP's back into lane, and all of a sudden he's at 1/3 HP. What the fuck happened? Like, you can't do that. It sucks all of the pressure out of the map when you do that, and Inspired has to go triage. But that is what Inspired has had to do this entire year so far, is random triaging. And people, I'm not being an Inspired apologist because I think he played pretty badly in the final series against PSG, but I can understand his frustration if the game plan is they have a game plan when he goes in, and then his lanes fuck it up, and then he has to go into that lane to save them. It's not selfish, by the way. If he was being selfish, he would have just let Bwipo to twist in the wind there. But the problem, if he did that, was that they definitely would have lost the game because Bwipo had no passive, he had no flash, he would have been dove on the wave bounce after taking that damage. So, it was really bad. And even in the next game, so they go for the lane swap, they go for the strong side invade, and T1 adapts really well because they have Ashe, and they realize that Ashe obviously is super strong at level 1. There is no team in the world that knows Ashe better than T1. You do not let T1 have Ashe, ever. Ever. Do not let them have it. You are not good enough. Imagine that, why this was so egregious, I think, from the FlyQuest perspective, is that what is the scenario with Ashe? You let them have Ashe. Remember, your bot lane is your weakness. You're going to let T1 double Hail of Blades lane your bot lane? The lane that has been struggling, the young lane, the rookie lane? No, you can't do that. So you have to lane swap. Well, T1 obviously reads that. What do? They just send Gumayushi bot in the 1v1, send Keria into the mid lane, chunk out Jensen on the Azir, and then they counter your invade, and because they have a significantly stronger level 1, you just lose the game off of that. And again, Inspired's on a farming champion, can't do shit on the Wukong. And then, I mean, it's just over, right? Because he can't rush 6. They trade up 3 for 2 kills, but they have much more map pressure and a much better situation. And, the lane swap fails disastrously for FlyQuest. So this was it was 2 very different poor showings in the T1 series, but it just showed that there was no way in 1,000 years that FlyQuest was ever going to beat T1. You play 100 games and T1 probably wins 98 of them.
This is why everyone has to, over the years, update the narratives. But don't do what the fan does, where you update it and then right backwards retcon all of history to always be the current narrative. Don't do that. So one thing I used to do, people might not know, is I have defended Whipple for so many years because, especially when he was in EU, he wasn't the player they all thought he was. By the way, he is that player now, which is someone who's just a fucking liability. He does silly fucking picks that don't work for him. He plays the lane in a mad abusive way, like it was solo queue, and he can just say, go next when he loses, like, even though it's a competitive game. Like, there's a reason why when everyone's going, Inspired just throw everyone under the bus, like, you imagine being a jungler who's a control jungler like him, who wants to play out the game and know where the enemy is and have edges, and you can't ever do it because you're always essentially, the second you start working on your fucking novel, the fucking kids start crying. It's I have to go and put him to bed again then. And that's what fucking dealing with Bwipo is like. And the reason I'm sick of this is because, guys, 2018, the year Bwipo was fire on Fnatic and brought into the scene, was 6 years ago now. 6+ years ago now. He's had 6 full years as a pro, and now he's had these massive deals in NA. He's on the super team in Team Liquid. He's on this FlyQuest squad now, and of these teams he's on, he should be one of the most guaranteed best players. He's like a mega veteran. He's been in Worlds a bunch of times. He's been in elite teams in Europe. He's actually,
been in
by the
Worlds
way,
finals.
This is a guy who's in a position now where he should be like the player you can rely on. And I always used to say before, because usually they even used to compose teams around this way, you'd have like the Reckless or an upset type ADC who's a star. You'd have the mid laner who's a stud who can do all sorts. And so then he could have this sort of like janky play style where he can feed or he can fucking carry, and he would play out these weird LS 20-minute theory sessions out in the game, and he had a different vision on laning. That was all great, right? But mate, this last year or so, especially, like it's become diminishing returns with this player because the joke of FlyQuest is this conversation should have only been about the bot lane and what was FlyQuest management doing. But if you look at the others, like I agree, the Bwipo one's the most egregious one, mate, because in all the bad games, he's always part of it. He's always one of the central villains in the bad games.
Well, I also think, like, I mean, we got to see the duality of Bwipo in the 2 series against PSG because in games 2 and 3 of the first best of 3, I thought Bwipo was quite good. We got to see why this Urgot pick. I mean, he is an Urgot specialist. He always has been. It's now in the meta. And he did great things. Like I think the R5 Olaf pick was really good for him, and we had seen that before, but Team Liquid dealt with it very effectively in the last game of the LCS finals, and he got zoned out repeatedly by Impact. And FlyQuest, again, their team play in that final was very far below average, so he never got a chance to show it. But in this game, he took over, and so he can take over games. We know that. The thing is that he's not reliable in his decision making. Like he will dominate games, but he will also make fundamental mistakes that he knows he shouldn't make. Like what happened when he TP'd back in versus T1. So he will simultaneously play a very high level game at times, and then he will just make the worst decisions at other times. And honestly, I think that the Bwipo inspired
it doesn't work.
The duo is kind of like a recipe for disaster.
If anything, he should be with like fucking Blabber or something, mate, and let's just go ham and top. Let's just go crazy. Like he can't. How can Inspired play his controlled style if he doesn't know what you're going to do?
Well,
how can he plan?
They also enable each other in weird ways. So if you look at game 2 of the second series between FlyQuest and PSG Talon, which is when they tried that tower dive in the top lane versus Aji's Rumble, and then just gave 2 kills to Maple's Aurelion Soul and used both their flashes. Like, this is such a stinker of a play. And they over pursue, running around after this fucking Rumble. Then they just waltz into the enemy jungle. And of course, Aurelion Soul just flies over, ults them, and gets a double kill. And it's like, now, okay, this, your tournament life is on the line, and you are making dipshit plays. And it's like they get so desperate, and their desperation like appears to like feed off each other, so that they just go way too deep. I mean, the whole story of the second best of 3 was these were winnable positions for FlyQuest,
sure.
And they would just run into the enemy. They would get an advantage and then immediately throw it away and trade down. It was crazy to watch. Like I expected so much better from this team.
No,
and Inspired was a big part of that. I mean, it just felt like they had been broken mentally by the T1 loss, which I don't know why you would be, because you expect to lose that series. And yes, like I said, it was really embarrassing in the way that you lost. You lost worse than you should have, but you should have lost. But you already beat PSG. How can you be coming in with a bad mentality? But it just seemed like they were not there mentally on the day.
That's also, by the way, where even though it may end up being that maybe it's just a particular combination of this top side that doesn't work. Bros, all those players now are real veteran. Even Inspired is a veteran, guys. He was popping up in 2019. It's only a year after Bwipo. Like, these guys, Bwipo, Jensen, and fucking Inspired, they've even been to a gang of international tournaments. They aren't rookies. I can give the bot lane a pass on some level, even though I thought the spot's fucking shit. He shouldn't even be there, but okay, right? The difference is the top side. Like, there is no excuse for that, by the way. There's a concept in Counter-Strike that I have made so much fucking analytical cachet off of Monte, which is all my fellow analysts just ride the fucking momentum train, which I despise as a concept, because it's a psychological concept, you fucking idiots. It's not a real tangible thing. So what I always say is this. What they do is they cast scores like this. Well, and after that, FlyQuest down after the first game. We'll see if they can bounce back. It's going to be hard, though, the way they were beaten. And I always go, yeah, but that's actually the way you know if someone's a top team or just a decent team, because a decent team will just take the same emotional state into the next game. And in Counter-Strike, by the way, the games aren't on the same map. Like in this scenario, you're going to be playing a different set of variables. So famously in Counter-Strike, maybe you did get battered on the first one. Maybe that was their map pick, though. Whereas in, like, it's coming to your map pick now. So the great teams, like if you ever watch FaZe Clan, LAN player, they do this all the time. They just do a full reset between maps. By the way, win or lose, even if they win, they do the reset and come back down, and then you build up again the second map. So the idea these veterans are like, one, carrying the T1 series baggage when they're playing another match, and then two, you've already beaten PSG. If you don't go into that thinking like, by the way, this is why actually I thought it was Corpium when in the interview Jensen was sort of like, maybe we just like, looked past them or ahead of them. That's not what top teams do. Top teams, what's brilliant, think about T1. Did they look past you, motherfucker? No, what they did is treated you, even though they shouldn't, like a real opponent and just fucking destroyed you, like, methodically. And by the way, even potentially did fuck around the draft, but by the way, they did that so they could just never lose. Like, even if you'd have gotten the early lead, they would have scaled out and just won anyway, wouldn't they? So actually, I take that almost as a sign of respect from them, that they didn't just go like, lol, just draft the early game comp, just fucking flip the coin. They said, no, you know what, we'll make sure we win this game. So that's where actually that excuse doesn't fly for me. You know what I mean? Obviously, pun intended. So I think, yeah, they've got to level this up, because this was actually like fucking very underwhelming. I mean, as you said, even though they got away with it, they could have lost that first series too. They could have lost to PSG in the opener.
I'm just surprised because I thought the in-series adaptations were so good from FlyQuest, and they fixed up almost all of the problems they had in Game 1 to win Game 2 and 3, and it looked like they had gotten into their groove. But I mean, it's not like PSG is some sort of unbeatable opponent either, right? I mean, sure, Maple's a legend, right? Junjia has had a lot of success in the past, but I mean, basically Riot has gone out of their way to gimp this region as much as possible to make sure that nobody, I mean, these players on PSG are probably paid 1/4 what the FlyQuest players are paid, maybe, right? And yeah, sure, they're the first seed from PCS, but Riot has basically hollowed out the Taiwanese region, taken away their league, combined it with other regions in the playoffs so that, now, sure, it's harder to get to Worlds for them because now they have to go through Japan and Oceania, right? As the path there, and only one team gets that slot. But basically, Riot has given LCS every single advantage. Oh, you get 2 seeds at MSI as well because you are a major region, right? When they expanded that, it's not just your first seed anymore. Just like Korea and LP and China, you get 2. So runner-up from the finals, you get to also go. But that has come at the cost of taking basically everything away from these minor regions, which I don't necessarily disagree with. But as a result, with the amount of money that you are paid and the performance that you are expected to deliver, you can't be losing to PCS. Like, we can talk about the legacy of Taiwan and how there actually are good players here, they're underrated, etc. But you can't lose this game. You can't. You have every single advantage going in, and it's your fault that you lose it. And, obviously your organization has much more money than fucking, any team from Taiwan does at this point in time. Like, the PSG name is one thing, but I don't think they're providing a war chest, right? This is a simple brand share for PSG. And, that's it. So
there's a legendary saying, though, that comes from football, and it's from like the visionary. He was a great player, but he's also a genius, like coaching people don't know, called Johan Cruyff, who's a Dutch player, right? He had a great quote he had when he was a manager. He said, "I've never seen a bag of money score a goal." That's the problem people like FlyQuest have. They think, well, yeah, you're right, Monte. We're on the big salaries and we're from the big boy LCS. And hey, and it's like, yeah, but you know what? You have to actually be able to perform in the server. Like, if you can't do it in the server, it doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't matter if he gets paid one fucking, I'd say shilling, but you don't know what that is. It's not very much money, and you're fucking a king. In the game, it's the ultimate equalizer, isn't it? That's one of the best things about the fucking game. So I think it's just pathetic, really.
Well, one of the things that I appreciate.
By the way, shout out, the one thing I do appreciate about Reginald at the end is at least he had the good grace, after doing all that evil and ill to the game of League of Legends, to actually just sort of like do a little whip around and raise a few million for true legends like Sword Art and Maple, and just pay them a bunch of money on the way out. So now they have that little fucking nest egg. So it doesn't matter now if they play in the little regions, with the old boys, they get to have their millions too. Fair enough, Reginald. I mean, I will say, if you're Bjergsen, you're a little bit salty salty you didn't get the millions, aren't you? But you know what? At least some players who internationally performed did, Bjergsen. So I did do my shitty little tweet, Monte, which is a banger, because it's not a lie. I never lie, Monte, which is that Maple is still the most internationally decorated player to ever play mid lane for TSM. There you go. That one sticks right in the craw, doesn't it? But it's true. It is true, though. It is true.
That's amazing.
I love that one. It's too good, isn't it? It's too good. It's too good.
I mean, Bjergsen did get his millions. He just took them from Team Liquid and ran it down. So, and didn't even make it international competition, which is worse. But look, you know, it sucks because as far as FlyQuest is concerned, like, it's good to see a team that wants to spend. You know, everyone else is cutting their costs, and like FlyQuest wants to be here.
Ambition, yeah.
Yeah, the ambition is there. So it's just disappointing that last year we had this hot start followed by the fucking car crash, right, of Prince and Vikla. And now this year we get what should be a hyped up roster that should have been, you know, competing with Cloud9 at the top, and like should have, you know, we knew the bot lane was going to be a little bit shaky. We didn't know that Bucio was going to completely and utterly devastatingly choke under any kind of pressure. But, you know, it's a risk you have with all kind of young players who are up and coming. Maybe he'll get over it. Probably won't. If I had to guess, that's not like his level of choking is not something that I normally see pro players like work past. You know, there's different kinds of choking, right? We could talk about Chovy. Okay, so here's the example. Chovy 2022 Worlds, when he forgot that he could play side lanes and he like reverted back to his old play style. The thing is, his old play style was still good. That's the thing. It wasn't complete in a macro sense, but in the Chovy vacuum, he was still doing well by himself. He just couldn't play the map, and that inhibited his team style because his team style was predicated on him being in a side lane and creating pressure. So, you know, he did fuck up his team. The thing about Bucio is that his level of choking is so bad that he gets into a final and he literally can't push buttons. Like, that is next level. Like, he will be in a team fight and use like one ability and then die. Or he'll miss everything. And Chovy wasn't missing things. He wasn't the complete player that he's become now. Right? He kind of went back to his former self. But even as a rookie, he was that player, and he was, you know, really good as a rookie, still a top player in the world. So Bucio, I think, overcoming whatever is going on is going to be extremely, extremely difficult for him. And I also think, frankly, that the team is asking way too much of him. Like, all of a sudden, he's playing support Rumble in the finals. Now he's playing fucking support Nico in their do or die game. Like, he's not Carrier, guys. You know? That ain't who he is. Like, you're expecting this giant champion pool out of this guy playing these, you know, quite different picks. And what do you expect is going to happen? Like, you need to return to comfort for this. His Renata Glask is probably one of his better champions. So he did get a hold of that. But I do think it's weird that all of a sudden we have like the Rumble and the Nico coming in. He's played one game of Rumble, which was fucking terrible, probably his worst game of all time. And then it's a second game of Nico on your elimination game.
I also do hate that, and I always will, where it's like, I've been watching Carrier play Nico and Life play Rumble. It's like, leave it there, though. Just watch them and then close the screen down and realize you're not them. See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.